August 14th, 2005, Larnaca International Airport, Cyprus, 9:07 in the morning. The August heat was already rising off the tarmac as a Boeing 737-300, nicknamed Olympia, sat fully loaded and ready to go. Flight HCY 522, Larnaca to Athens, Athens to Prague. Routine enough that most of the crew had probably done it 20 times before. In the cockpit sat Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten. 58 years old, German, quiet to the point of being reserved. Colleagues called him a man of very few words, but nobody questioned his ability. 35 years of flying, 16,900 flight hours in his logbook, 5,500 of them on the 737 alone.
His first officer was Pampos Charalambos, 51, Cypriot, 7,549 hours in the air, 5 years working exclusively for Helios. These were not nervous rookies. They were experienced, practiced professionals who had done exactly this route dozens of times. In the cabin, 4 flight attendants were preparing for boarding. The chief was Luisa Vouteri, 32, Greek, living in Cyprus. She'd been called in that morning at the last minute to cover for a colleague who'd rung in sick. She had a wedding to plan, her own the following month. She came in anyway. Then there was Andreas Prodromou, 25 years old. He hadn't even been scheduled for this flight. A spare seat opened up and he took it because his girlfriend was working this route and he wanted a few extra hours with her. Her name was Helios Charalambos, also a Helios flight attendant, also on this flight. They were engaged. Andreas was more than just cabin crew. He was working flight attendant shifts to fund his way through commercial pilot training. He already held a UK commercial pilot license. He was also a trained scuba diver, which, as it turned out, would matter more than he could possibly have imagined. He boarded Olympia that morning to spend time with the woman he was going to marry. That's the whole reason he was on this plane. Behind all of them, 115 passengers, 103 Cypriots, 12 Greeks, 4 Australians, 93 adults and 22 children. Families heading to Prague for August holidays, people who had kissed someone goodbye and promised to call when they landed. At 9:07 a.m., Olympia rolled down the runway at Larnaca and climbed into a perfectly clear Mediterranean sky. Nobody on board had any idea that the aircraft already had a problem, one set in motion quietly in the early hours of that morning by a maintenance check that nobody would remember until it was too late. The same aircraft had flown in from London Heathrow the night before, touching down at Larnaca at 1:25 in the morning. The incoming crew logged a problem with the rear service door, ice forming around the seal, hard banging sounds during flight. They asked for a full inspection. A ground engineer came in. He ran a pressurization leak check, a way of confirming the cabin holds air the way it should. To run it without the engines running, he had to move one switch on the cockpit overhead panel from auto to man, automatic to manual. He did the test, found no significant leak, and signed the aircraft off as serviceable. Then he left the switch on manual. Whether he forgot or simply didn't think it mattered, the investigation was never able to say for certain. But there it sat, man, on the overhead panel, waiting for the morning crew. Captain Merten and First Officer Charalambos arrived and ran through their pre-flight checklist, a procedure designed precisely to catch errors like this. The switch was right there on the panel, in the wrong position. They missed it. They completed the after-start checklist, missed it again. After takeoff, the after-takeoff checklist. A third time. 3 separate checks, 3 separate chances. At 9:07 a.m., Olympia lifted off with the pressurization still on manual, and as the aircraft climbed through 10,000 feet, the cabin began to lose pressure. Slowly, silently, with no outward sign at all. Here's the thing about hypoxia that most people don't know. It doesn't feel like suffocation. It doesn't hurt. The first thing oxygen deprivation does due at altitude is make you feel warm, calm, and mildly euphoric. Your thinking slows down, but pleasantly, like the edges of the world going soft. Everyone who has survived and remembered it says the same thing. It felt like falling asleep. So picture what was happening in that cabin as Olympia climbed. The oxygen was leaving the air around 121 people. and not one of them would have felt anything except, perhaps, unusually comfortable. At 12,040 feet, a warning horn sounded in the cockpit. It was the cabin altitude warning, designed to tell the crew, "The cabin is losing pressure. Put your oxygen masks on. Begin emergency descent. Now." Captain Merton heard it and got it wrong. Because Boeing had built one horn to serve two completely different warnings. The cabin altitude warning and the takeoff configuration warning, a minor ground-level alert, produced an identical sound. Merton believed he was hearing the takeoff warning, which can only trigger on the ground. He thought it was a glitch. He was already mildly hypoxic without realizing it, his judgment quietly softening, and he radioed the Helios Operations Center. "Takeoff configuration warning is on. Cooling equipment offline." The engineer on the ground, the same engineer who had left the switch in the wrong position, asked him directly, "Can you confirm the pressurization panel is set to auto?" Merton didn't answer the question. He asked instead where his equipment cooling circuit breakers were. The engineer told him, "Behind the captain's seat." That was the last transmission from the cockpit. The voice recorder captured the sound of Merton rising from his seat, going to check the breakers behind him. He never made it back. At approximately 28,900 feet, both pilots lost consciousness. The Boeing 737, carrying 121 people, was now being controlled by nobody but the autopilot, flying steadily toward Athens, toward a city that had no idea what was coming. In the Athens Area Control Center, controllers were tracking Flight 522 as it approached Greek airspace. At 9:37 a.m., it crossed from Cypriot airspace into Athens FIR. Standard procedure, the crew check in. Nothing. The Athens controller called. No answer. He tried the emergency frequency. Nothing. Over the next hour, he called 19 times, on standard frequencies, on the international emergency channel that every aircraft in the sky is required to monitor. 19 calls. Not a single word back. Other pilots nearby tried too. Silence. The Helios Operations Center, by now frantic, tried from the ground. They got nothing. At 10:40 a.m., Flight 522 arrived over Athens, and instead of beginning its descent, the autopilot simply started flying it in circles. A standard holding pattern, what aircraft do when they're waiting for landing clearance. Except nobody had told this aircraft to hold. The autopilot was just following its programming, flying Olympia in slow, methodical loops above the Greek capital. For 70 minutes, the ghost plane circled Athens, silently, perfectly, automatically. By this point, the Greek National Operations Center had been alerted. A passenger jet with no radio contact circling a major European capital. In the post-September 11 world, there was one word for that: renegade. A possible hijack, a potential terrorist threat. At 11:05 a.m., two F-16s from the Hellenic Air Force 111th Combat Wing scrambled from near Anchialos Air Base. They reached the aircraft at 11:24 as it completed its sixth loop. The lead pilot pulled alongside and looked through the windows. The co-pilot was slumped over the controls, arms hanging, still. The captain's seat was empty. Yellow oxygen masks dangled from the cabin ceiling, most of them unused. Through the windows, he could see passengers sitting motionless, a few wearing masks, none of them moving. The cabin was dark. The fighter pilot matched the Boeing's speed. He pulled up to the cockpit windows and signaled, rocked his wings, waved. The Boeing kept flying its circles. He tried for nearly 40 minutes. The aircraft flew on, steady and indifferent, with 121 unconscious people inside and two fighter pilots outside who had no way to help any of them. Here is what was happening inside that aircraft. At 34,000 feet, without supplemental oxygen, a person has less than 30 seconds of useful consciousness. The yellow passenger oxygen masks that had dropped from the ceiling work on a chemical generator. They provide about 12 minutes of air. In a normal emergency, 12 minutes is plenty because the pilots are already descending, already getting the aircraft down to 10,000 feet where people can breathe properly. On Flight 522, the pilots were unconscious before the masks even deployed. No descent was ordered. The masks ran out, and one by one, the 121 people on board lost consciousness, among them 22 children. The autopsies later confirmed something genuinely difficult to sit with. All 121 people were still alive when the aircraft hit the ground. Whether any of them were conscious in those final seconds, nobody can say. In the cabin, the flight attendants had followed their training exactly. They put on their portable oxygen units, which last considerably longer than the passenger masks, sat at their stations, and waited. Waited for the pilots to speak. Waited for the descent to begin. Neither happened. When their oxygen ran out, they lost consciousness too. Luisa Valteri, Haris Charalambous, all of them, except Andreas. His scuba diving background had given him a physical instinct for recognizing oxygen depletion, the kind of trained bodily awareness that most people simply never develop. He caught it. He managed his oxygen carefully, and as everyone around him went under, Andreas Prodromou stayed awake. The woman he came on this flight to be with was somewhere in the darkness of that cabin, and he was the only person left who could do anything about it.
Think about what Andreas was actually working with. He was partially hypoxic himself. Oxygen impairs your thinking long before it takes your consciousness. He was moving slowly through a darkened aircraft with 120 unconscious people around him. He had no idea how long this had been happening, how much fuel was left, or precisely where they were. What he had, a pilot's license, an understanding of cockpits, and the knowledge that Haris was somewhere behind him. His first problem was the cockpit door. After September 11th, aviation authorities mandated reinforced cockpit doors with electronic keypads, locked from the cabin side. Andreas didn't have the code. The chief flight attendant kept it. Luisa Valteri, unconscious at the forward station. So he made his way to the front of the aircraft and searched through her belongings while she lay unconscious, his own mind running on borrowed time, trying to find a code that might be the only chance 121 people had left. He found it. At 11:49 a.m., 3 hours and 42 minutes after Olympia left Larnaca, Andreas Prodromou entered the cockpit and sat down in the captain's seat. He put on the headphones. He looked at the panel in front of him. Outside, the F-16 pilot saw him appear. A young man in a light blue shirt, sitting in the captain's seat, putting on headphones. After nearly 40 minutes of circling a ghost plane, the fighter pilot felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Hope. He signaled, "Follow me down." Andreas raised his hand and pointed downward. He understood. And then the left engine flamed out. Fuel exhaustion. 3 hours and 42 minutes had burned through everything. Every step Andreas had taken through that darkened cabin, every door, every search, every slow hypoxic movement toward the one place he thought he might be able to help. The clock had run out before he ever sat down. Andreas sent 2 mayday calls into the radio. His voice, captured on the cockpit voice recorder, was barely audible. Neither call was received because the radio had been tuned to Larnaca ATC since takeoff and had never been switched to Athens. For nearly 4 hours over Greek airspace, this aircraft had been transmitting into an empty frequency. 10 minutes after the left engine died, the right one went too. 60 tons of aircraft, no power, descending in an uncontrolled left-banking turn over the hills north of Athens. Andreas Prodromou stayed in the captain's seat. At 12:04 p.m., Flight 522 struck the eastern slope of a hill near the village of Grammatiko, 33 kilometers northwest of Athens. The impact was total. High speed, immediate destruction, post-impact fire. Wreckage scattered across more than 800 meters of hillside. Greek journalist Panos Sombolos was among the first at the scene. He wrote, "Bodies torn apart, human remains in all directions, pieces of the plane twisted and mangled, burned debris stretching across hundreds of meters, the fuselage wedged into a slope blackened by fire. Everywhere, horror, grief, devastation." A woman arrived at the perimeter, dressed in black, speaking through sobs. "I came for 5, not 1. The cursed ones have closed our homes forever." The Perilli family from Paralimni, Cyprus, had been wiped out entirely.
118 of the 121 bodies were eventually recovered. Andreas Prodromou and Helios Airways, the couple who had boarded this flight just to spend a few extra hours together, were found and buried side by side. The official investigation was led by Greece's Air Accident Investigation and Aviation Safety Board, with the flight recorders sent to Paris for analysis. What they reconstructed was a chain of failures, studied in aviation training programs worldwide, not because it was complex, but because it was almost insultingly simple. One switch left in the wrong position, because the maintenance procedure contained no explicit step requiring the engineer to confirm it had been reset. A gap so small it was invisible until it wasn't. Then a flight crew that missed it on 3 separate checklists. Then 2 identical alarm sounds encoding completely different emergencies, one routine, one potentially fatal, with no way for a crew to tell them apart. Then 2 pilots who didn't put their oxygen masks on the moment any pressurization warning sounded. Every failure had a solution. Every link in this chain had a fix. None of them had been applied. The airline had also known this specific aircraft was troubled. In the 10 weeks before the crash, the environmental control system on Olympia had been inspected or repaired 7 times. In December 2004, 8 months earlier, this exact aircraft had experienced a rapid pressure loss on a Warsaw flight. Crew made an emergency descent, incident investigated, root cause never definitively resolved. The plane kept flying. The legal consequences played out across 2 countries. In Greece, Helios Airways officials faced charges of negligence and manslaughter. In Cyprus, the Department of Civil Aviation faced accusations of systemic regulatory failure, of allowing an airline to operate with known safety deficiencies and failing to act. Relatives of the 121 victims sued the Cypriot government for negligence. The airline was found guilty. Officials were convicted of manslaughter. Helios Airways stopped operating in June 2006 and was dissolved. Families received initial insurance settlements in 2007. In March 2024, 18 years after the crash, Cyprus's Court of Appeal was still hearing compensation cases. 18 years. Still working out what those families were owed. The FAA issued Airworthiness Directive 2006-13-13, requiring all Boeing 737 operators to install dedicated warning lights that distinguish pressurization alarms from takeoff configuration warnings. The 2 sounds 1 meaning problem that killed 121 people was corrected with an indicator light. Pressurization checklists were updated to require explicit switch confirmation. Crew resource management training was overhauled. The people on that flight changed aviation. Not by choice, not by heroism alone, but because the world looked at what happened and could not afford to let it happen again. On the hillside above Larnaca, where the eastern slope still carries the scars of that August morning, a memorial stands. Photographs of all 121 people are mounted on the stone, faded now by years of Mediterranean sun, bleached by the same light that was shining when Olympia lifted off that morning. Families come back every August 14th. They bring flowers and say the names out loud and stand in the heat for as long as they can bear. Among those photographs, Andreas Prodromou. Beside his photograph, Helios Airways. Hanging next to his, just as they had planned to stand next to each other for the rest of their lives. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about this flight. The people on board almost certainly felt nothing alarming as the cabin pressure dropped. Hypoxia survivors describe it consistently. Warmth, mild euphoria, a pleasant sleepiness. They were not afraid. If anything, they felt fine, and then they weren't. If you've ever been on a flight and felt a little drowsy, wondered whether you were just tired or whether the cabin air was thin, that question is not irrational. That's what your body is designed to notice. And the story of Helios 522 is partly about what happens when the systems designed to catch that moment fail.